Good day, listeners and viewers, and welcome to this FTSE Russell Convenes podcast. I'm David Sol, your host, and I'm joined today by someone who I consider the best geopolitical analyst, Tina Fordham from Fordham Global Foresight. In this episode, we're going to reflect on 2025, and Tina will then share her outlook for next year. Welcome back, Tina.
Thanks for having me, David.
Now, Tina, 2025 has been such an eventful year. There's been tariffs. The markets had to focus on the relationship between China and the US, Russia, Ukraine, AI, so many themes. How do you reflect back and think about 2025?
It's really been quite a year. And when we think about the optimism with which market participants started the year, there was an expectation of a Trump bump after, years of high inflation under President Biden. High hopes for peace in the Middle East and between Russia and Ukraine. And that all met with some shock and surprise, really crystallized around the Liberation Day tariff announcements. Other, geostrategy developments in the year, lest we forget, included attacks on Iran, conflicts cropping up elsewhere, Thailand, Cambodia, India, Pakistan, several in Africa, military deployment around Venezuela in the Caribbean. It's been intense, but you and I have known each other for a long time. We've been talking about geopolitics and markets for, over a decade. And I do think that this was the year that particularly C-suite leaders had a wake-up call. That geopolitical risk was not a blip, that it was here to stay. Our own research on the geopolitics supercycle, really illustrated how geopolitical risks have been accelerating over a period of time. But I think this was the year that everyone got the memo. Of course, the diverging message is in terms of markets, where, of course, we had very robust performance from markets. And in other episodes of The Navigator that we filmed here, we've talked about how the signal versus noise construct really isn't helpful for talking about the current constellation of risks and how they interact with markets, because geopolitics is about power, and the changing power dynamic really is reshaping the global environment, even if it isn't yet impacting asset prices or share prices in the way that we might expect.
And of course, for investors, they focus on change, right? The catalysts. And if you think about the risks of 2025 and going into 2026, how are the risks shifting? And we spoke in previous episodes about unknown risk, and we spoke about new risks emerging. How do you think about the transition, 2025 going into 2026?
Well, it's a lot to think about, and the simplest way to try to structure the future is to start with the known knowns and the signposts. And with that in mind, everyone's year-ahead list is focused on the U.S. midterms. This never used to be a market-moving event, but when we've got a White House with such an ambitious and far-reaching policy agenda, the outlook for who controls Congress is very important. And of course, the so-called affordability crisis really was brought into relief in the off-cycle elections in America. And given President Trump's importance on the world stage and the emerging dynamics between the United States, Russia, and China, midterms will be an important clue for us, although I'm not sure they will change the policy trajectory, to be sure.
And so outside the US, what are some of the signposts perhaps in Europe or Asia that you're monitoring?
Yes. Well, the elections in Hungary in April are of critical importance. Hungary is a kind of a medium-sized economy in European terms, so that might be surprising. But Hungary has been a regional hub for a lot of manufacturing in Europe. And also Prime Minister Viktor Orban has been on the scene for a very long time. I once had lunch with Viktor Orban about 15 years ago in Budapest, before he became Prime Minister, when he was still in his Soros phase. But Hungary is a pivotal state in terms of its complex relationship, shall we say, with the European Union, where it has pushed back against efforts to support Ukraine, and that's happening now with respect to the future of the frozen Russian assets that are held in Belgium. And Orban also enjoys the support of President Trump, Xi Jinping, and Vladimir Putin. At the same time, he is under pressure from a challenger with the name of Peter Magyar, which means Peter the Hungarian, and there is a potential for a change of government there. I'm also looking at what Orban might be planning to do in terms of adapting the constitution so that he might remain as president. This is something that we've seen happen in Turkey and elsewhere. So an election that wouldn't normally command a lot of attention, but it will be one of my most important European signposts.
Thank you. And when we look at the news in 2025, from time to time you might feel it's all doom and gloom, but are there some good reasons to be cautionary optimistic about the future?
Well, I always get a little bit, hurt when people talk about doom and gloom when it comes to geopolitics. And I think that's partly just a mentality. I mean, certainly when it comes to conflict, that is a very disturbing and unsettling development. But a lot of what we talk about when we talk about geopolitics is really change. And there's no way of stopping change. We are moving out of the post-World War II order and the Pax Americana, and that has been in train for many years. I first wrote a paper called Goodbye Pax Americana, more than 10 years ago.
I remember that, yes.
Yes, it was a long time ago. I reread it, and, it was actually quite on the money, but it's a reminder for investors who are looking at, minute to minute, day to day, quarter to quarter kind of data points at how structural change tends to move slowly. And this power dynamic that I mentioned, the relationship between countries, will have an effect on companies. And I can tell you the conversations that we're having with board leaders and C-suite leaders really boil down to one idea, and that's how to move away from, the last 30 years of focus on just in time and how to optimize everything about your business to resilience. And that might seem very old-fashioned. It certainly will be more expensive. It has big implications for supply chains. And then on the other hand, we have the tech environment, rocketing ahead in terms of change. It's a lot to balance, and it's a lot of new moving pieces.
Now, in 2025, we discussed at the beginning of the year the word geopolitical denialism, or those words. That term was, I would say, capturing your vision of 2025. What is the word for 2026, or what are the words for 2026 that will capture your geopolitical thinking?
Yes, I talked about geopolitical denialism with you in an interview I did with Time Magazine. And thanks to the wake-up call that I mentioned, I do think geopolitical denialism is now in the past. It's really much more a conversation about what to do, how to position, and how to structure. But my word of the year for 2026 is predator. And I think that this is distills to the essence of what the new power dynamic that we're talking about means. It means might makes right. It means law of the jungle, and that's a difficult message to take, unless, of course, you're the predator.
Well, we don't know whether that is the case, but it's based on a book. I
don't mean you personally.
No, I understand that. But it comes from a book. Is that right? That the term
was inspired by a book by Giuliano da Empoli, and highly recommended, very easy to read, entertaining, but also based on interviews. And he goes back and compares the rise of the Borgias in Italy to the tech industry. He also interviews a lot of leaders for it. So it manages to be both fairly light and entertaining, plus pretty substantive. And it crystallizes that idea of the predatory environment that we're entering as the rules of the game start to become less relevant or even disappear.
Okay, so 2026 power dynamics, and your word to capture that is predatory. Thank you, Tina, for sharing your thoughts. And of course, thank you very much to the listeners and viewers of the FTSE Russell Convenes podcast. And this is our last podcast of the year. And I look forward to speaking with you in the next year. And but for now, I wish you a very happy and healthy 2026.